So, are we headed towards civil war? Now, I've spoken about national divorce before, and I view that it's both not practical and not desirable under the existing circumstances. Now, civil war is another topic. I think it's more likely than national divorce, and I think there's some ominous signs out there. I still think it's a really bad idea. Americans had a peculiar form of civil war. Ours was a ideological and sectional in nature. Because it was sectional, meaning that it's based on regions, the manner of its creating two distinct political entities, essentially two different countries, was somewhat unique. Civil wars don't always look like that. In our current situation, if such a split up would occur, there might be states where the population might want to split away, but in almost every case, the state's largest city and capital cities would not want to secede. I think a better model for looking for what could happen here would be the Spanish Civil War. Now, the Spanish Civil War is a difficult topic to talk about. Like most things of that era, communists and socialist morons hijacked the event. They've created this really overly simplistic, romanticized version of the event, characterizing it as purely a war between fascists and communists. In fact, it's far more nuanced. I intend to talk about the events that led up to the Spanish Civil War, not so much the war itself. Francisco Franco was not a fascist or a Nazi. Uh, the victory he created had some fascist elements, but this was merged with the ideas of numerous conservative and traditional parties. His movement was mildly socialist, socially conservative, and unlike fascism and Nazism, counter revolutionary. His party did oppress Jews, but did not imprison or execute or expel them. During the war, Spain unofficially helped Jews escape access controlled areas in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. During the Franco maintained an opportunistic semi-neutrality during World War II. Unlike socialist Germany and fascist Italy, his economy became more free market oriented over time and had little in the way of expansionistic tendencies. Also, over time, Franco would also abandon autarky. The Second Republic of Spain was a parliamentary system initially run by a coalition of socialist and liberal Republicans. The government was highly popular in the big cities and viewed with suspicion uh, and as being elitist in the rural areas, small towns, and the enclaves of traditional Catholics. Ultimately, a parliamentary system creates different levels of tension than the uniparty state that Madison tried to design for the US. Parliamentary systems exasperate factionalism. The US system tends to empower the establishment, which is generally more stable until polarization starts to occur. The Spanish Second Republic government took a non secular society and attempted to bring in secular changes that exceeded what the non urban areas considered tolerable. This included seizing church property and requiring rent from the buildings thereon, prohibiting clergy from teaching when almost the entire school system had been taught by the clergy previously, driving out the Jesuits, the creation of civil marriage and civil divorce. This created an atmosphere where approximately 7,000 clerics were murdered by extreme leftists who felt empowered by the direction of the new government. These same leftist groups went on a vandalism and arson spree against churches and convents. Catholics demanded that the government do something about the situation. Prime Minister Azana famously retorted that the burning of all the convents in Spain was not worth the life of a single Republican. The government blamed monarchists for antagonizing the leftists. We saw similarities in the U.S. During the BLM and Antifa riots of the last several years. BLM and Antifa were allowed to run roughshod over American cities in 2020. When people demanded action, the establishment responded with quips like mostly peaceful protests, the language of the unheard. Very few people were arrested, and the few that were arrested didn't face serious charges. Prominent politicians egged on the rioters and even organized GoFundMe bail campaigns. Polarization is created when one faction allows its militants to act criminally, but not punish them, because their coalition is too fragile to risk offending extremist supporters of violence. The Second Republic also ordered agrarian land reform and land redistribution. Scholars on the topic of land reform compare land reform as a form of wealth redistribution. Interestingly, many papers on the subject point out that land reform typically causes a large uptick in social strife. The reason for the increase in social disturbances in the aftermath of land reform occurs because the reforms alienate everyone. The people who are supposed to benefit become upset because the outcome never lives up to their expectations. The sources of the redistribution, the rich landowners, are unhappy because their property has been forcibly taken from them. And then everybody who is not involved becomes upset because they want to know why they aren't the recipient of some form of largesse. The Spanish land reform duplicated the outcomes of many other countries' attempts at land reform. Agitation and social disunity was the result. For the U.S., redistribution has moved along slow enough not to cause major issues. However, the current move towards irrational and illogical reparations are sure to have an agitating effect on U.S. society. Scholarly papers indicate that land reform is a form of wealth redistribution. What if the U.S. embarked on a form of monetary wealth redistribution on a far larger scale than it has before? Consider the banking crisis of 2008, when banks were bailed out when the overwhelming majority of people didn't want it. The most recent Silicon Valley bailout, which essentially benefited very wealthy depositors in the bank. COVID relief efforts. Small businesses shut down while large businesses like Walmart are allowed to stay open. Interestingly, the movement afoot to have reparations is attempting to create redistributions on an even larger magnitude than those ones. It's not hard imagining this having a similar effect as land reform. The recipients will be disappointed in the result because their lives aren't going to suddenly get better. The people who have their money forcibly taken from them will not be happy, and everyone with a grievance who is not a recipient will be unhappy and demanding their fair share. It's hard to believe that the learned scholars pushing reparations are unaware of this. They are either ignorant of, don't care about, or welcome the negative outcomes. The Spanish monarchy had been waning for years, but still had a large influence, including the military and political groups hoping for some form of monarchy restoration. At the forming of the Second Republic, King Alfonso fled the country. The new government was cautioned to avoid agitating pro-monarchy groups However, the new government perceived the existence of the old king as a threat to them. They tried and convicted Alfonso of high treason in absentia, which was a death penalty offense. The result was the monarchists in the country became arch foes of the new government. Their numbers were significant and included part of the military. Here in the US, we need to be on the lookout for the party into control to start beginning to use attempts to use the legal system against former politicians with large bases of supporters. An aspect of the Spanish Second Republic, the anti-clerical reforms, had an impact of making rapid secular changes in the face of a population that was a majority religious group. The change from religious to civil marriage and civil divorce overnight changed something that most Spanish saw as the sole province of the Creator himself. And it was a shockingly jolting change. The government pulling the clergy off from the education and creating a secular system over a short course had parents deeply concerned about the rapid change of doctrine in the schools. Leftist violence against church buildings and clergy also was a shocking change, not even considering that the government was failing to uphold the rule of law. Vandalism and arson are dramatically up in occurrences at U.S. churches, most of it aimed at U.S. Catholics. The U.S. sees a similar thing occurring in the realm of morals. We have had a rapid rise of what is being called wokeism. On one hand, a massive reversal in thought from the content of the individual to creating systems where we fixate on immutable characteristics. The use of common words are suddenly deemed too offensive for public utterance. The ideas that race and gender are social constructs that one can freely choose and then choose again. The idea that any mode of thought can be viewed dogmatically and assigned an identity that has to be treated as real and as immutable characteristics of a person, while at the same time denying that immutable characteristics exist. This is causing political strife in a very similar way that it did in Spain, in our schools and religious people of our nation. I basically just Googled the question, what caused the reforms of the Second Spanish Republic to fail? And it gave me a quote back. It did not elaborate the quote, so I don't know who to source it to, so my apologies for not knowing that. But the answer to why the Spanish Second Republic failed: the Second Republic collapsed owing probably to attempting to do too much too quickly with too much passion to right historical grievances, real or imagined, in the face of entrenched resistance to those radical reforms, and was immediately and defended with equal passion. There are huge differences between the US and Spain. Spain had a century of instability, including some military takeovers. It had a waning monarchy, but it still was there and had power and had support. Catholicism was the state religion. The government of the Spanish Second Republic was a brand new system. They had a parliamentary system, and they were a backwater country, very much unlike what the US is set up. The Spanish Civil War in the lead up and execution had many factions. There was a tendency for participants on the extremes to mischaracterize their opponents as being members of the opposite extreme. The far left characterized everyone to the right of them as fascists, and the far right characterized everyone to the left of them as communists. Mislabeling causes polarization. Beware if we start seeing that here. Due to all these reasons, I don't see civil war as likely, primarily because the United States at least at this moment, seems to be far more stable than what Spain was. However, it's not impossible that with enough agitation and enough anger, that something similar could happen here. We need to keep an eye out for the warning signs so we don't end up rhyming along with Spain's history. So, do you think civil war is possible in the United States? Feel free to comment. Tell me below what you think. Do you think the Spanish Civil War has some parallels to what we're seeing in the country now? Again, comment below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please consider subscribing. I cover many subjects. And if you know somebody who might find this interesting, please share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.